The night of my retirement party should have been the proudest moment of my life. 32 years. That's how long I gave to that firm. 32 years of 70-hour weeks, missed anniversaries, postponed vacations, and late-night calls with clients who never bothered to learn my first name. I built that company alongside Daniel, my partner, my so-called friend from a cramped two-room office with peeling paint and a single flickering light. And yet, as I stood there in the ballroom of the Grand Crescent Hotel, staring at the glittering chandelier above, I felt something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was unease. The room was filled with executives, clients, even a few city officials. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage. On a velvet-draped pedestal sat a massive sculpture covered in silk, Daniel's retirement gift. I'd heard whispers about it for weeks. Custom-made. Commissioned from some famous New York artist. Rumored to be worth over $100,000. Daniel thrived on spectacle. He always had. I adjusted my cufflinks, a gift from my late father, and watched him laugh too loudly at something our CFO said. He looked radiant, victorious, as if tonight was his coronation, not our joint farewell. "You deserve this, Michael," he'd told me earlier, clapping my back. "We built an empire." We. That word had always been his favorite. I smiled for the cameras. I shook hands. I thanked people for their loyalty. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the memory of the past year, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the financial reports that arrived late, the way Daniel had started making decisions without consulting me. Maybe I was paranoid. Retirement does strange things to a man. It makes him count his wins and his losses. When the MC took the stage and called Daniel's name first, the applause was thunderous. The silk fell away, revealing a towering bronze sculpture of a phoenix rising from ashes. A symbol of leadership and rebirth, the MC declared. Daniel wiped a theatrical tear from his eye. I clapped too. But deep down, something told me this night wasn't about honoring what we built. It was about rewriting who built it. And I was beginning to suspect I wouldn't like the new version of the story. I knew something was wrong the moment they brought out my gift. Daniel had just finished his speech, a performance worthy of a standing ovation. He talked about sacrifice, vision, brotherhood. He even mentioned my name, briefly. Michael was there from the beginning, he said, as if I were a footnote in his memoir. The applause came in waves. He stepped down. People surrounded him. Cameras flashed. Then the MC cleared his throat, and now we honor Michael. Polite applause. Lighter, shorter. Two junior associates wheeled out a small white gift bag. No velvet pedestal, no dramatic lighting. Just a bag with silver tissue paper poking out of the top like an afterthought. My stomach tightened. The MC smiled. "In appreciation for your years of dedication." His voice trailed off as if even he realized how hollow it sounded. I stepped forward, forcing a smile. I reached inside the bag and pulled out a thin envelope. The paper felt cheap between my fingers. For a second, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was a handwritten tribute. Maybe it was stock options. Maybe it was. A $4 restaurant gift card slipped into my palm. $40. To a mid-tier chain steakhouse 2 blocks from the office. The room went silent in that awkward, suffocating way crowds do when they realize they're witnessing something they shouldn't be. Someone chuckled nervously. A glass clinked against a plate. I looked at Daniel. He was already watching me, smiling calm. "Measured. There's more," he said smoothly, stepping closer to the microphone. Michael insisted he didn't want anything extravagant. He's always been modest. I hadn't insisted on anything. My ears rang. My face felt hot, but I kept it together. 32 years of boardroom composure doesn't disappear in one moment. I held up the card slightly. Very thoughtful. I said, my voice steady. "Thank you." The applause returned, thin, uncomfortable. But that wasn't the worst part. As the evening wound down, our CFO, a man who avoided eye contact like it was contagious, slipped me a folder near the bar. "You should look at this," he whispered. "Soon." Inside were revised partnership documents, amended profit distributions, asset transfers. My name had been diluted. My shares quietly restructured over the last 18 months. Legal. Sealed. Daniel hadn't just embarrassed me. He had been carving me out of my own company. The sculpture wasn't the insult. The gift card was the distraction. I didn't confront him that night. That surprised me more than anyone else would have guessed. 32 years ago, I would have flipped the table. I would have demanded answers, dragged the truth into the open, consequences be damned. But age does something to a man. It teaches him that anger is loud and power is quiet. I drove home alone. My wife, Eleanor, had stayed back east to visit our daughter and the new baby. She'd watched the live stream earlier. She'd texted, "Proud of you. Call me when it's over." I couldn't bring myself to dial her number. Instead, I sat in my dark kitchen with the folder spread across the counter. Line after line of legal phrasing. Amendments, adjustments, relocations, all signed by me, or at least something that looked like my signature. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and stared at the dates. 18 months ago. That's when Daniel insisted we streamline paperwork. He'd said we were restructuring for tax efficiency. I remembered signing stacks of documents between meetings, trusting him the way you trust gravity. "You don't need to read every line." He'd laughed back then. "We're in this together. Together." I replayed every conversation from the past year, the closed-door meetings, the new board members I'd barely met, the way Daniel started referring to the firm as his vision instead of ours. The humiliation at the party wasn't the deepest cut. The deepest cut was realizing I'd helped him do it. Eleanor finally called me around midnight. "How did it go?" she asked gently. I hesitated. I could have lied. I almost did, but marriage has its own version of truth serum. "They gave him a 6-figure sculpture," I said quietly. "They gave me a gift card." Silence. "That's insulting," she said. "It's worse than that." I told her about the documents, the diluted shares, the transfers, the possibility that I was no longer the equal partner I thought I was. "Can you fight it?" she asked. I looked around the kitchen, the house we'd almost lost in the early years, when payroll mattered more than mortgage payments. I thought about our daughter's college tuition, the sacrifices, the trust. "I don't know," I said honestly. But what I didn't tell her was this. I wasn't just hurt, I was ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't seen it sooner. Ashamed that the man I trusted like a brother had been planning my exit like a hostile takeover. That night, I didn't sleep, I didn't rage, I didn't cry, I studied. Because pain can paralyze you or it can sharpen you. And sometime around 3 a.m., staring at Daniel's neat, calculated signatures beside mine, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about understanding the game he'd been playing, and whether he realized I'd taught him most of the rules. Revenge isn't built on rage. It's built on patience. For the first time in my career, I stopped reacting and started observing. I didn't storm into Daniel's office. I didn't call an emergency board meeting. Instead, I did what I had always done best. I gathered information. Quietly, methodically, without emotion. The next morning, I contacted a forensic accountant I trusted, someone Daniel had once dismissed as paranoid. I scheduled the meeting under the guise of estate planning. No one questions a retiring man thinking about legacy. I also reached out to an old law school friend, Rebecca Hall. She specialized in corporate litigation. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but favors earned over decades don't expire easily. When we met in her downtown office, she skimmed the documents and leaned back in her chair. "He didn't technically remove you," she said. "He diluted you, slowly. Legally, if you truly signed these," I repeated. She looked at me carefully. "Did you?" That was the question that haunted me. Some signatures were mine. Others felt off. Slightly heavier ink. Different pen pressure. Subtle differences that only someone who's signed his name tens of thousands of times would notice. Rebecca's expression darkened. "If there's forgery involved, that's criminal. But we don't move until we know, you understand. If you accuse him prematurely, he buries you in legal fees." Daniel had always been aggressive in business. Ruthless, even. But forging documents, that crossed into something colder, something calculated. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I attended final transition meetings. I smiled. I shook hands. I even sent Daniel a congratulatory bottle of scotch for the Phoenix sculpture installation in his new office lobby. "Classy as always, Michael," he texted me. He thought I had swallowed the humiliation. Behind the scenes, the forensic audit began uncovering patterns, shell consulting fees, redirected bonuses, board votes scheduled when I was conveniently out of town. Daniel hadn't just been preparing for my retirement. He had been engineering my irrelevance. The most interesting discovery came 3 weeks later. One of the amended partnership filings had been submitted on a date I was in Zurich, hospitalized overnight for food poisoning during a client conference. I had proof, medical records, time-stamped passport scans. Yet somehow, my signature appeared on a document filed that same afternoon in New York. Rebecca didn't smile when I showed her. "This changes things," she said quietly. For the first time since the party, I felt something close to calm. Not satisfaction, not yet, but clarity. Daniel believed he had humiliated me publicly and secured himself privately. He assumed I would walk away quietly, grateful for my gift card and retirement speech. He forgot one thing. I built that company's compliance systems. I wrote the risk protocols. I trained the board on fiduciary duty. If he wanted to play dirty, he picked the wrong opponent. The first move wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork. Rebecca filed a quiet preservation demand requiring the company to retain all internal communications, financial records, and board correspondence from the past 2 years. It was routine, procedural. On the surface, it looked like a standard retirement compliance review. Underneath, it was a tripwire. Daniel called me within hours. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice light but measured. "Legal says there's some kind of records request tied to your name." I leaned back in my chair at home, staring out at the winter gray sky. "Just cleaning up loose ends before I fully disengage. You know how I am." A pause. "Of course," he said. "Thorough as always." Thorough. That word used to sound like respect. Now it sounded like concern. Within a week, the forensic accountant uncovered something Daniel couldn't explain away as restructuring. A private advisory firm, recently formed, had been billing our company 6 figures quarterly for strategic consulting. The owner, Daniel's brother-in-law. The payments had begun right around the time my shares started shrinking. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I requested a final retirement review meeting with the board, a courtesy session, I told them. I framed it as a legacy discussion, transparency, governance continuity, the kind of thing investors appreciate. Daniel couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days leading up to it, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I was winning, but because I was no longer confused. Confusion is exhausting. Clarity is energizing. On Wednesday night, I received an anonymous email forwarded from our IT contact, another quiet ally. It contained a screenshot of an internal message Daniel had sent to 2 board members months earlier. "Once Michael's equity is fully diluted, we reposition branding around a single founder narrative. Investors respond better to clarity." Single founder narrative. I stared at the words for a long time. I wasn't just being edged out financially. I was being erased historically. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me precise. Thursday morning, I walked into that boardroom not as a retiree, but as a man holding evidence. Daniel smiled when I entered. He didn't yet know the narrative was about to shift. The boardroom had always been Daniel's stage, floor to ceiling windows, polished walnut table, the skyline behind him like a crown he believed he earned alone. For years, I had sat at his right hand. That morning I chose the seat directly across from him. Equal, opposite. Michael wanted to share some closing thoughts. Daniel began smoothly, hands folded. Legacy reflections. I almost admired the performance. I opened the leather folder. "I'll keep this concise," I said, my voice steady. "Because this isn't about legacy. It's about liability." That word changed the temperature in the room. I slid copies of the forensic summary across the table, the Shell consulting payments, the timeline of equity dilution, the Zurich filing date with attached medical records. One board member adjusted his glasses. Another stopped pretending to check emails. Daniel didn't touch the papers. "This is absurd," he said calmly. "Routine restructuring framed as misconduct." "Then you won't mind explaining," I replied, "how my signature appears on a filing submitted while I was hospitalized in Switzerland, or why your brother-in-law's consulting firm received $480,000 in 12 months without a single deliverable." Silence. Daniel finally picked up the documents. His jaw tightened, just slightly. Most people wouldn't notice. I did. I'd spent 3 decades reading that face across negotiation tables. "You're implying criminal behavior," he said carefully. "I'm stating documented inconsistencies," I answered. "The distinction matters." Rebecca, seated beside me as outside counsel, spoke next, calm, clinical. "The preservation notice ensures all communications are secured. If necessary, we escalate to formal investigation." There it was, not an accusation, a pathway. One of the independent directors cleared her throat. "Daniel, is there an explanation we should hear?" That was the moment power shifted. Not when I presented the evidence, not when Rebecca spoke, but when the board stopped looking at him with admiration and started looking at him with assessment. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Michael is upset about a ceremonial gift and is overreacting. I let that sit in the air for 3 long seconds. This was never about the gift card, I said quietly. It was about being erased. I pulled out one final document, the internal email about the single founder narrative. That one landed harder than the financials, because money can be justified, but rewriting history, that feels personal. The board chair stood. We're suspending executive decision, making authority pending internal review. Daniel's composure cracked for the first time. You can't be serious. But they were, and he knew it. Power doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. Over the next 2 weeks, the company I helped build turned into a pressure chamber. The internal investigation moved faster than Daniel expected. Emails surfaced. Board members who once laughed at his jokes suddenly avoided eye contact. The advisory firm tied to his brother-in-law became impossible to defend once procurement records showed no competitive bidding, no measurable output, no oversight. The Zurich signature was the breaking point. A handwriting analyst confirmed what I already knew in my gut. At least 2 of the amended filings bore traced variations of my signature, close enough to pass at a glance. Criminal under scrutiny. Daniel called me 3 nights after the board suspended him. You've made your point, he said. His voice was lower now, less polished. What do you want? That question revealed everything. He still thought this was negotiation. I want the truth documented, I replied, and my equity restored. You're willing to burn the company down over pride. I almost laughed. This isn't pride. You tried to erase me. You forged my name. A long silence. You're not as clean as you think, he said finally, a weak threat. Desperation disguised as leverage. Then present it. I answered calmly. I welcome scrutiny. He hung up first. By the end of the month, the board voted to terminate his executive authority pending regulatory review. Investors were notified of leadership restructuring. The press release was careful, no accusations, just language about governance integrity and fiduciary responsibility. Daniel's Phoenix sculpture was quietly removed from the lobby during renovations. That detail reached me through a former assistant. I didn't ask for confirmation. I didn't need it. But fallout doesn't just hit the guilty. Stock prices dipped temporarily. Employees whispered in hallways. My daughter called me, worried after seeing a business journal headline. Dad, are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said. And for the first time I meant it. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about watching someone fall. It's about restoring balance. Still, late at night, I felt the weight of it all. 32 years reduced to legal memos and board votes. A friendship turned into an affidavit. Daniel sent one final message before formal proceedings began. You could have walked away rich and peaceful. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. The final settlement didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a quiet conference room with no cameras, no applause, and no Phoenix sculpture. Daniel looked older. Not physically, but structurally, like something inside him had shifted under pressure. His lawyers did most of the talking, mine listened. The terms were precise. My full equity was restored retroactively. Back dividends paid with interest, a public correction acknowledging me as co-founder in all corporate history and branding materials. Daniel agreed to step down permanently in exchange for avoiding criminal charges related to the forged filings, contingent upon full financial restitution and regulatory cooperation. He signed without theatrics. For a moment, it was just the 2 of us in the room after the attorney stepped out. You could have destroyed me, he said quietly. I met his eyes. You tried to erase me? A long pause. I built that company too, he added. I know, I said. That's what makes it tragic. There was no shouting, no dramatic speech, just the dull recognition that something valuable had died long before the paperwork caught up to it. In the months that followed, the company stabilized. An interim CEO was appointed. Investors regained confidence once governance reforms were implemented, reforms I had originally written years ago. The bronze Phoenix was never reinstalled. Instead, the lobby now displays a simple plaque listing the founding partners, both names, side by side. No sculpture required. I donated the $40 gift card to a junior employee who once told me he couldn't afford to take his wife out for their anniversary. He never knew the story behind it. And that felt right. People assume revenge feels explosive, victorious, cathartic. It doesn't. It feels quiet. It feels like balance being restored after a long tilt. Daniel faded from headlines within a year. Reputation damage doesn't need noise, just permanence. As for me, retirement finally became what it was supposed to be. Time with Eleanor, mornings without conference calls, evenings without strategy sessions. But I carry the lesson with me. Trust is not a substitute for verification. Friendship is not immunity from accountability. And silence, when faced with injustice, is complicity.